Okay, YouTube, I have something interesting for you today. So this is a problem I ran into on my personal system here with the X79 platform specifically. So I have been kind of resistant to upgrading my CPU, mainly just for budgetary reasons, but I decided this year that it was finally time for me to go to SSD storage. And rather than go with just a SATA SSD, I decided that, while I'm at it, I might as well get NVMe because I'm going to upgrade to a new CPU, motherboard, that kind of stuff eventually anyway. So I figured might as well buy a drive that I'm going to use, going into the next few years, rather than just getting something that's going to be outdated for when I move to the new platform within the next year or so. So anyway, as you can see, I'm going to show you right now. I'm running this i7-4820K CPU. Quite old as of 2021, but it still works quite well. It does have a mild overclock. Still 32 gigs of RAM, that kind of stuff. But really the interesting thing here is that my C drive here is this Sabrent 2 terabyte NVMe. Of course, with X79, we're limited to PCI Express Gen 3.0, but this drive happens to be a 3.0 SSD anyway, so we're getting pretty close to what this drive can do in terms of performance. We're not really losing too much on that front. But of course, the people who are familiar with this platform, who are watching this video, are already familiar with X79 as a platform. The LGA 2011 platform came out before NVMe existed. The newer boards, the X99, the generation after this for like the high-end desktop Intel platforms, everything from X99 newer all had NVMe support natively. But the thing is, I have seen other servers from this generation of CPU using NVMe drives. So I knew like going into this that it would be possible. But the thing I didn't know is whether or not I could actually make it happen. So what I ended up having to do is actually create a custom BIOS for this. To get this to work, what I did was I tracked down a BIOS level driver for NVMe support from a newer Gigabyte X79 board. So the next generation of board after this X79. And what I use this AMIB CP5 BIOS editing tool. I basically injected that driver into some free space that was left over inside the BIOS after all of the driver section in there. And it took me a few tries to get this right, but basically I just went through some guides online to do that. And it's been a few months since I did this, so I don't really remember all the steps. But the important thing is I ended up with a BIOS file that did work. So this is what I called it. I called it an F8 revision because the latest revision provided by Gigabyte was an F7 BIOS. And I will be providing this file for download. I'll put a Google Drive link in the description for this video. But I'd just like to give you the disclaimer that I'm not responsible if you break your motherboard with this. But keep in mind, I don't feel that risky about giving this file to you because these boards, the X79 UP4, specifically the revision 1.1. If you have the revision 1.0, just don't try to flash this file because it will probably break your board. No guarantees. Think about what you're doing before you do it, basically. Anyway, these are dual BIOS motherboards though, so if you do completely fuck it up, there's a jumper on the motherboard. Flip it over to BIOS number 2. You should be able to recover your system. Anyway, with all those disclaimers out of the way, that's the BIOS file right there, the X79 UP4 F8 ROM that I created, and it's been pretty stable. I mean, it didn't really change much, but I've been running this BIOS on this computer, booting from NVMe for about 2.5 months now, and I haven't had any issues with it. Everything seems to work as you'd expect. In the BIOS, it's kind of funny, because the BIOS wasn't really meant for NVMe support. The the drive just shows up as generic flash disk, which is kind of funny. But once you're in Windows, Windows does recognize it properly. And anyway, let me just show you what that looks like, I guess. I'll just run a disk benchmark. Actually, we'll do crystal disk info so you can see that I'm not BSing you about having a proper NVMe support. Ooh, did not like that on X79. Let's see. Okay, crystal disk info, and we'll do crystal disk mark too. Okay, here's our crystal disk mark. Yeah, that's my secondary drive. That is my F drive, but this is my C drive, Saberent. And you can see interface NVMe Express PCI 3.0 X4, and yeah. Oh, also to get this drive to even plug into this board, because obviously X79 it doesn't have an NVMe slot, so I'm using one of the other PCI Express slots with the riser card, which I'll show you a picture of right now. But yeah, I mean, you see, this drive's been running for 729 hours. Haven't had any problems. But yeah, anyway, let's just do a benchmark here though, so you can see what kind of performance you're gonna get. And there we go. As you can see, pretty good performance. Not really too bad. Not quite up to what this drive's spec is, but pretty good. And I'd just like to give this BIOS, put this out here in the wild. I figured, I made it for myself. I figured there might be other people out there that also want this kind of functionality on their X79 board. If you're using something like this, well, I know these boards are really popular. This age of hardware is really popular for home servers, that kind of thing. Having NVMe support on this platform is really great. And again, this BIOS is only for the X79 UP4 made by Gigabyte specifically, so don't try this on any other board, this BIOS file that I'm giving you. If you do want to add NVMe drivers to another X79 platform, there are resources out there. A lot of stuff is a little outdated. You kind of have to wade through stuff. Honestly, the hardest thing for me to find was the actual NVMe driver itself. That file is kind of elusive, but once you get that, it's really not that big of a deal to put it into your BIOS. The trick is just knowing which section of the BIOS to put it in and making sure your BIOS has enough free space to add this in, which most of them do. It's not the hugest driver module. It should fit for the most part, unless you have some kind of weird complicated BIOS setup. But then again, I only tried it on this platform because this is the computer I have, so I don't really have much to say on other X79 boards. But that being said, it should all be theoretically possible to fix. Of course, if a project like this is too intimidating, maybe it's best if you just stick with a SATA SSD. Honestly, that 500 megabytes per second that you get out of a normal drive should be plenty for most uses. Again, main reason why I did this is because, I'm going to be upgrading motherboards, and I want to just be able to put my new NVMe drive in a new board when I get it, and this seemed like a good option. Not to mention that adapter card I mentioned that I'm using for the SSD itself was like less than $10 on Newegg, so it was like, if I could spend just $10 more and then get a really good SSD to put in this computer to use for the meantime. And honestly, I've been pretty happy with the performance. Like, as you can see, it's like it's going to be, this isn't quite as blisteringly fast as some of the other NVMe computers that I have in the house. Some of the laptops I have completely blow this out of the water in terms of boot time and stuff like that, but still a hell of a lot faster than the hard drive I was using. And it's pretty cool, to take a piece of hardware, this motherboard that came out in 2012, which, in case you're not keeping track of time, 9 years ago, and put the newest or, some of the newest storage hardware in there and have it work properly and reliably is pretty cool. So anyway, I just, I want to keep these computers from going in the landfill, and I hope this can help you upgrade your personal PC, your media PC, your Plex server, whatever you want to use it for. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you do use the BIOS, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear how it goes for you. And if you have any questions about, installing the BIOS, changing, editing stuff, I'm by no means an expert, but have read through many forums on the subject, and I'd be happy to help you troubleshoot, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, just be careful. BIOSes can be scary. If you mess things up, your computer will turn into a brick. So with that warning out there, use at your own risk. But this is the file that I personally have been using, and it's been fine. So take that with a grain of salt. Anyway, have a nice day.